Do you want to give your users a custom KPI tile that gives them a high-level piece of information, sparking their curiosity to further drill down into a report where they can slice and dice the information the way that they want to do it? Do you want to give your users access to an embedded SAC dashboard, giving you a 360-degree view of your transport operations, from your core transport through to the integration with purchasing as well as sales, giving you a very accurate view of what is happening with each of your carriers, as well as what it is costing you to transport each of your products and what that is doing on your profit margins? Then if so, stick around for this video. Hello and welcome back. Today we shall continue our journey in transportation management, but we shall also seize this opportunity to revisit an oldie but goldie topic, which is that of reporting. It's been a while since we talked about custom CDSs and KPIs and embedded SAC, and a lot of things have changed since we last talked about it. So I thought that would be a great opportunity to today kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and to marry those topics of reporting with transportation management. So we shall be looking at how you can go about building your custom CDSs to underpin the build of a custom KPI as well as an embedded SAC story, a fully end-to-end transportation management dashboard that you can offer your users to consume. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. Before we get knee-deep into the topic of today, I would be remiss to not ask you to also look at the blogs and OSS note indicated on the screen at the moment, for which I will share the links in the description of this video. Please make sure you read them before you start your analytical journey. Okay, so I hope that this has got you enthused, and now that we know what we are going to try and build in this particular episode, let's look at the various building blocks that we need to check off our list in order to be able to achieve that kind of a result. So at the bottom of this hierarchy of tasks is the need to first of all create custom CDSs, and we are going to leverage the app Custom CDS to build our own custom CDSs that are themselves leveraging standard SAP CDSs. And please do make sure that you do look at the OSS note that was referenced earlier on in the introduction, because this will also help you understand the scenario that you need to pick when you go off and create your custom CDS. If you pick the wrong scenario, it could be that all of this is not going to yield the result that you want, because you'll find yourself in a position where the CDS that you've built is not usable. So make sure you understand what the scenarios are and which is the one to pick. Once we've done our CDSs, the next step is to create a custom analytical query. Now, for better for worse, the need to create a custom analytical query is that it is the only kind of data source that the other objects that we are going to be creating, namely a drill down report, a KPI tile, as well as embedded SAC stories, understand. Apart from that, the custom analytical query is also an object, a report that can be leveraged in its own right. So the custom analytical query that we'll create will then become the data source to the KPI tile that we will create, and the KPI tile will then offer also a drill down report, a drill down capability to a drill down report. And technically the KPI tile and the drill down report are different technical objects, but they both leverage the same data source that we will be creating here as the custom analytical query. And then lastly, we'll create an embedded SAC story, and this embedded SAC story will serve the purpose of providing our users a dashboard, if you like, that provides them a bird's eye view, a 360-degree view of the transport operations happening in their area. Namely, it'll provide one page that gives them high-level purely transportation information in terms of volume utilization, weight utilization, capacity utilization, if you like, but then we'll also cover off the important aspects of the integration to purchasing to understand exactly with which carriers we're spending what for our freight, but we'll also look at the integration into sales so that we understand how we can measure the freight component that is part of a sales order and sales order item that had been billed to a customer. Now, whether you use the freight condition as a fully fledged pricing condition, i.e. that you're going to bill to your customer, or whether you simply want to understand what the freight cost was so that you can get a better profitability analysis of a sales order, is all information that you are going to be needing. All right, so now that we kind of know what we're going to do, let's start off at the start and look at the custom CDS. Okay, so to create the SAC story dashboard, we've actually created a few CDSs. So we're not going to be looking at all of them because they've all been built more or less in the same way, but we will just focus on one of them, which is the one that we are using to do the integration with sales. And the one that I'm looking for is this one here, freight order to delivery C. And so in this CDS, we can see that we have a couple of data sources that have been joined together. So we have a primary data source as well as an associated data source that's going to provide data derived from this condition, from this joined condition that essentially says, well, this is how these two CDSs are joined together logically. And we can also see right off the bat that both of these data sources are themselves custom CDSs. So we're still not here leveraging standard CDSs, if you like. In terms of parameters, there isn't much there. We can also look at the elements, which is just going to essentially tell us which are the fields that we are using. So from those two data sources that we have that are providing us all of this wealth of information, this wealth of fields, this is where we have decided what we will then provide to the custom analytical query. And we can see that we have some information coming from the freight analysis CDS, and we should also have some information coming in from the freight invoiced CDS. So we are fully leveraging both of the CDSs that have been joined together. So this is one of the CDSs that we are going to be leveraging in our KPI as well as in our SAC story. So let's have a quick look at one other CDS that we are leveraging. So this will look at the CDS called freight invoice, which is an input into this CDS here. So let's go one step back. Let's paste here the name of that CDS, which you can see is also created under the scenario of Analytical Cube. And this particular CDS is leveraging two standard SAP CDSs. And we are seeing here that the primary data source is the billing document item cube, because if you recall, the freight cost charges that were copied from the freight order are copied into the billing document, and that is what is invoiced to the customer. So that gives us, from a header point of view, the connection, if you like, from the freight order to the billing document, or will give that to us. And we have also, as an associated source, added the billing document pricing element CDS, because out of all the charges that exist in a billing document, product price, taxes, insurance, and what have you, we are only really interested in one charge, which is that charge that we had defined as the ZTRA custom pricing condition, which is the one that bears the cost that was copied from the freight order. So we are joining these two together. So here to say, well, I want to get the billing document information, but I also want to get pricing information. And again, we have a join condition between the two. And quite logically, we are joining the billing document and the billing document item, or leveraging those two fields to join these two CDSs together. So if we now go to filter, we should quite possibly have something here. So again, we have here an expression-based filter. And what we have said is that out of this particular CDS, out of all the information that it's going to provide, we don't want to get all of the pricing information. We just want to get the pricing conditions for which the pricing condition type is equal to ZTRA. Now in this particular case, I've actually used the expression-based filter. So I've pasted or leveraged the field name and then actually entered the condition in a code-like editor, if you like. I could have also have gone directly for a form-based, which is actually even more user-friendly. Also of importance is that you always have the compatible changes and dependencies that are indicated here. This, of course, is really important for you to leverage, especially when there are changes introduced in the SAP CDSs. For example, if a field is deprecated, then obviously, or even with regards to some of the changes that you can make in this CDS, it's telling you, well, be careful, because this CDS is linked to something else, it's consumed by something else, and the change that you are going to make here need to be compatible with the other objects that are consuming this particular CDS that you've got here. Of course, as you know, in the CDSs, you can always click on preview to look at a preview of the data that will be provided via this CDS. So we're applying the parameters. And as you can see, we are getting some information. I can recognize here the billing document numbers, and then we have just pricing condition. We're getting a whole lot of information around billing documents and billing pricing information. And as you see here, we had a filter on the condition type ZTRA. So it's good to see that we are only getting as a result of that CDS data that corresponds to the filter that we had actually added as well. So now that we have kind of covered the custom CDS part, the next step is looking at the custom analytical query, because as I said, whether we want it or not, we have to create a custom analytical query, because that's the only data source that the objects that we are going to be creating subsequently are going to recognize. So let's go on back to the system and look at the definition of the custom analytical query. So again, we go to the custom analytical queries app, and again we are just going to quickly put in a filter. So again, let's try and find this time the query which I am going to be feeding into my drill down report, KPI and embedded SAC story, which is this one here, freight to order to delivery queue, as in query. And this particular query consumes the CDS that we saw 2 seconds ago. And you can see that this information is then also conveyed right here in the data source field, where it says that the WAWA1 freight to order to delivery C, so CDS, is my data source feeding into my query. So all the fields that had been selected in the query, once again, are also available in my query, and they are there. And you can of course select them to be displayed by default or not. So if we go to a display, and you can see here all of the fields that have been selected to be part of the rows, or the measures that are automatically part of the columns. And then we have a certain number of fields that are also available but have just not yet been set as being automatically exposed in my report. The other thing that we can look at here is that we have added a calculated measure, which is percentage freight portion. Now, we could also have added a calculated field in the CDSs, but personally I prefer to do it in the query, because I find much more user-friendly, in the sense that here in the formula editor I am really just putting in a field name that is very English, very spoken English sounding, so freight value divided by total sales times 100, which is going to give me a percentage telling me the portion of the freight value compared to the total item value. And as I said earlier on, this custom analytical query is already a fully fledged object that you could provide to your users to consume the information contained, or the information served by this query. To preview the data, you simply click on preview, and the users would get a WebDin Pro report exposing the data served from this query. And already this is quite a powerful reporting environment, and you don't need to go beyond that if you do not wish to, or you don't have to, meaning that you don't have to create a KPI, you don't have to create an embedded SAC story. For some users, it is quite possible that this particular report would already provide a fair amount of very usable information. So here in the left hand side of the screen, we have all of the fields that we had selected as part of the row section of the query, and then on the right hand side we have all of the measures that have been in the query identified as column fields. Now what you can also do here is in the navigation panel call it up and remove or add fields, because if you recall, there are certain fields in the query that we had not deemed to be necessarily added as part of the default display. So you can absolutely, if you so wish, add any one of those fields that wasn't selected to be displayed, and you can decide if you want to add them to the row or to the column part of your report. Similarly, you can also remove items. So if there are, for example, a piece of information that you want to remove, you could simply click on a particular field to have it removed from where it was in your report. You can also, of course, add filters, you can do sorts, you can do totals. You can also, from this report, navigate to other functions, and you can also export this data, which is of course very usable if you want to further slice and dice this information in, for example, Excel, or if you needed to export it to PDF to maybe share it with an external stakeholder or someone that did not necessarily have access to S/4HANA Cloud. But coming back to our chickens, what we really want to do here is look at the data exposed and make sure that it makes sense, because that's now going to feed into the next part of what we're trying to do, which is to build KPIs, drill down reports, and embedded SAC stories. So again, an opportunity to look at the data, and from a sanity point of view, it's always good to look at this data just to make sure that there aren't any blanks. If it doesn't make sense, that is what should be in those cells. Okay, so we've created our CDSs, we've created our custom analytical queries which consume our CDSs, but we are going to continue with what we are really trying to achieve here, which is to, number one, as shown on the left hand side here, create a KPI tile. So this is a KPI tile that will appear on my Fiori Launchpad whenever I log on to S/4HANA Cloud, and will offer me the capability to drill down to more detailed information. And again, back in SAP, so where we are going to create this KPI and report is in the Manage KPI and Reports app. And here you can see that it's divided into various sections. So number one, you have KPIs, two, you have report, and then you have stories. And we're going to stay in the KPI one for the time being. And within the KPI, you again have two sub sections, if you like, which is groups and KPIs. So we're going to start off by creating a group, because even if we go straight to KPI, at some point it's going to ask me to create a group. So let's go ahead and create, and we'll call this transportation reporting. Very original. And as you can see by the little red stars, that is really the only mandatory piece of information that I need to put in there in order to progress. I would certainly encourage you to add some more information to make it as explicit as possible, because as you know, people come and go in organizations, and it's always nice when you have information at hand that kind of gives you a bit of background in terms of what this does, why was it done, what was the purpose of it, whether it's in the system or somewhere else. So I would certainly encourage you to put as much information as possible. And at this point, this is all that we are really going to indicate. Then here at the bottom, you've got a couple of other sections, and this is telling us that we can add groups and we can add KPIs once we have created, saved, and activated this group. So let's go ahead and click on Save and Activate. And what this now does is that it adds these buttons, these capabilities to add to my group. And I'm not going to add a group. I don't need to, I don't want to, but what I do want to do is add a KPI. So I'm going to say add a KPI. And this KPI, we will call this freight spend. But the really important and interesting part of this particular app, this app that we're in now, is the definition of the data source, i.e. what is the source that is going to feed data into the data that's going to be exposed via this KPI. So we go to define, and again we go and find the custom analytical query that we created a few minutes ago, which is this one here, freight to order to delivery queue. That's my query. And once I've selected it, it populates the CDS view with the name of my custom analytical query, and it also fetches automatically the OData service and the entity set. Now these were created automatically when we saved and we published this custom analytical query a few minutes ago. So we're going to say OK, and we have the information coming up here, and then we go down to the bottom of it, and the system, what it's asking here is asking what the measures are that we are going to expose in this KPI tile. Now you also have to do a bit of work before you jump in willy-nilly into creating those KPIs. You need to understand what the purpose is, what you want to achieve, what you want to expose, how you're going to go about it. And in this case, and I say this because it's going to drive the kind of KPI that you are going to be providing to your users. Are you just providing one figure? Are you going to be providing 3 figures? It really depends, so you need to put a bit of thought into that. And what I'm going to put here is the freight value. I just want to provide to the users when they log on a tile that tells them, well, this is the freight value. That's the freight spend, if you like. You could also add some additional measures, and again this will depend on what is the information, what is it that you are trying to convey in that tile to the user. So if you recall, we had a few measures in the query, and you have the possibility here of selecting additional ones to the one that you've already selected here. I'm just going to leave it at that at this point. Then there are also some additional thresholds that you can put in there, and this is quite helpful if you want a color coding to be associated with the freight value that is going to be provided to the user. In my case, I'm not going to add anything. I just want that freight value to be added, and we don't really need to put anything else at this point. So I'm just going to say save and activate. So the KPI base data has been established. The next thing that we need to do is we need to go to the visualization part and let the system know how we want to expose this information to the user. So what we could do here is we would normally be saying here add tile, which would allow us to do that. But when we create the tile, it's also going to ask me for a drill down report, and that's a mandatory piece of information. So rather than starting this here, then going back to the drill down report, knowing that we need to create a drill down report first anyway, let's go ahead and do it from right here. So we're going to say, let's go create a generic drill down report. Okay, so now we've navigated to the generic drill down report part of the process. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the configuration part. We'll go to charts and tables. And what we can do here is we could either add as a drill down capability, a chart or a table. So what we will do is we will add a chart. So that's going to be a graphical element, and we'll call this freight spend. Actually, I'll say drill down report. We'll say add, and because the data source has already been identified in the KPI, you see I haven't had to indicate it here again. The system already knows what my data source, my query is. What I can do here though is I can further customize the chart that the users are going to see when they drill down from that tile into the report. So let me add a couple of other bits of information, and what we'll do is we will, on top of the freight value, we'll add the entire sales value, so we can kind of have an idea of well, the freight spend was X but the total value was Y. And I'll also add the name of the customer. So I'll put the sold to party name. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that's not too bad. I can see by customer what the freight spend has been versus the total sales amount. Okay, so that's not too bad, and we will just leave it at that. So I'm going to activate this drill down report, and I'm going to go back to the KPI tile definition. Okay, so the report has been activated. Let me close this, and we are now back in the KPI. Again, we go back to the visualize. Now I'm going to go to add tile. Here you have the different kinds of tiles that you can use, that you can expose to the users. So this is also why I made that comment with regards to putting some thought into what is the information that you want to present to your users. How do you want to present it to your users? Because this will have an impact on what measures you select. But in our case, we are just going to select the most simple one, which is we just want to have one number exposed, which is that of the freight value. So I pick this numeric tile, we'll say OK. You have here as well a small indication of what that tile is going to look like. So you could here change, we'll say freight spend invoiced, I will say freight value invoiced to customers, because that's what we are really going to expose. You can also have a refresh time here, and seeing as we don't really expect this information to be updated, every minute, maybe we can just say 5 minutes. So again, this is more from a system performance point of view. You might want to revise that information. Then here, this is where the report name comes in, and as you can see here, it's a mandatory piece of information, hence why we created the report first. And if we go to report name now, you can see there is only one coming up, which is what we would have needed to present anyway. And then the last piece of information that is required as mandatory is a semantic object. And what we are going to do here is we're going to select freight order. Which we have right here. Okay, so at this point, I think we're pretty good. So again, we'll just say save and publish. And as soon as we have saved it, so this will then take us into the custom catalog extensions app, which is going to allow us to publish our tile, freight value, KPI tile, to a specific catalog. And this is needed because the catalog is going to be the link between the KPI tile and the users that actually can view this tile. Because as you know, a catalog will be assigned to a role will be assigned to a user. So for all of this chain to work correctly, we need to assign our KPI, our freight value KPI tile, to a particular business catalog. So you'll probably need to choose this wisely. So I am going to add this to a transportation related tile, which is, well, we are exposing freight values, so we'll put that under order management, for example. So we've picked the catalog, transportation, order management. Once we're happy with that, we simply select the catalog that we have selected and we say publish. Do you want to publish to the selected business catalog? Yes. And here you go. It says that it has now been published. So what this means is that this KPI tile is now available in this catalog transportation order management. So me as a user, the last thing that I now need to do is to add that KPI tile to my Fiori Launchpad wherever I want it to be. So what we now want to do is add this particular KPI tile that we've just created in the Fiori Launchpad, and I want to see that app right there in my Fiori Launchpad in my app section, so that whenever I log on, it's front and center, it's right there in front of me, and I can directly see what the value of my freight spend is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit the current page, and I'm going to add a tile in that section, and as usual you can simply type in the name of the app you're looking for, and if you recall, we call this KPI tile freight value. And we can see that it's down here at the bottom, so I'll just click on plus. It's now been added to my apps in my home page. So let me go back, and I'm going to say close, and boom, there you go. We now have the app freight value invoice to customers that has been updated. It's going to get updated every 5 minutes. I can also click on the now to refresh it if I don't want to wait that long. But if you also recall, we associated a drill down report to that KPI tile. And if I click on this tile, it should open up that drill down report. There we go, perfect, that we had also associated with the KPI tile. So this offers me some information as I had defined it in the KPI tile, but you still have, of course, the ability to yourself as a user keep on going and adding your own pieces of information, whether it's going to be a measure that is available or another dimension. You can further slice and dice this information as you want it. You can also obviously flip-flop between the graphical to the tabular view. You can export the information to Excel if you so wish. So again, usual things that you can do with these kinds of reports. So that covers the KPI part of what we were wanting to do. So again, let's quickly go back to the PowerPoint and see where we've gotten to. So again, we had the CDSs done. Custom analytical query, that was done. We now created a KPI tile where we said that we wanted to leverage this custom analytical query, and in the midst of creating this KPI, we also said that we wanted to create a drill down report that was going to be my navigation, my go-to point whenever I click on my KPI tile. And we've also exposed this KPI tile on the Fiori Launchpad of the users that needed to have access to it. But the plus of all of this is that the information can now be exposed as a KPI that offers a drill down report capability, but the drill down report that we defined within the context of this KPI can also be used completely individually and independently of this KPI tile. So for that, let's go back to the Fiori Launchpad. And if we go back to the Manage KPI and Reports app, and this time we go to the Reports part, and we'll just type in freight. We've got our freight report, which is our drill down report. And if we click on Show Preview, it should show us exactly what we had defined in that drill down report. And there we go. So again, you could also separately expose this drill down report to the users as a tile. And then the last thing that we are going to be looking at is the embedded SAC stories. In the intro, we showed you a dashboard that provided information regarding transportation orders, but also provided you information regarding the integration of transportation to sales as well as to purchasing. So how did we do that? So again, we have to go to the Manage KPI and Reports app. And this time we go to the Stories part of the app. And to create your story, the process would be fairly straightforward as well. So again, we go to firstly creating a story. You have to give it a name. We'll call it Transport Financials. And then you would move on to the configuration part, and this is where the story is going to load. At first, it's going to be a blank sheet of paper, so to speak. And the first thing it asks you is, what is your data source? And you can have multiple data sources available in your story, which is exactly what we have done. We've mashed up 3 data sources. So the first one, which is a standard SAP data source, which is transportation order for business dashboard. I guess that's what it means, order to query. And once your data source has been added to your story, it asks you to indicate certain units of measure that will be used to expose the data in your stories. And you can also customize certain settings, such as whether the prompt should be proposed by default whenever the story opens. In this particular case, I don't really want them to be changed every time, so we'll just say set. You can, of course, here in the data sources section see the data sources that you have already associated to your story, but you can also add additional ones. First of all, you can add pages, and then within each page you can add or remove lanes, and within each of the lanes you can decide what kind of object it is that you want to insert. In our case, we added a mixture of both tabular and graphical information. So if you wanted to add a tabular representation of your data, you would simply click the insert tabular data, which is then, as soon as you open it, going to propose the last data source that you added. But you can also obviously change it if you had multiple data sources defined already at this point. You can then pick the measures as well as the row data dimensions that is going to be added to your report. So for example, here, if you were to say, I want to see the carrier name, I want to see the destination location, I want to see the freight order number. So you get the gist of this. You have the ability to influence the data that is going to be presented in your story. You can also, of course, leverage the ability to insert a graphical element, and you could have within one lane multiple tabular and or graphical elements. In this case, again, you could put bar column chart. You could, in terms of measures, add the gross volume, the gross weight, and you could then also add in the dimensions, the carrier, which would allow us to see the gross weight and gross volume that had been transported by the carriers that we utilize. So essentially, this is what we did. We created 3 pages by adding additional data sources. So for each page, we had a specific data source, which again gave us the transportation data on one hand, the integration to purchasing on the other hand, and then also the integration to sales on the other. And so if we look at the dashboard that we presented in the intro of this episode, we will see that, or we will show how we built it. So as I said, we created 3 pages, which are now available to easily navigate to and from via this little drop down that we have here at the top. It gives us a main view, which gives us an insight into transportation per se, and we are here leveraging a standard SAP data source, which is the one that's indicated there, and already provides us some nice high-level information in terms of the carriers that we are interacting with, the places that we go to, as well as the number of freight orders, utilization information, and weight and volume that was transported by these carriers. Based off that same data source, we have then also added some KPI tiles, if you like. So these are really, from a SAC point of view, graphical data representations of this data source. But again, gives me a really quick, sharp, very focused piece of information. Gross weight by carrier, gross volume by carrier, number of freight orders, number of items, business shares, if you like, that I am giving to my carriers. In the next page over, we then have the purchasing view, and this will show us another custom analytical query that had been created to expose purchasing information, and again gives us a really good detail of the breakdown of the charges that we incurred whilst dealing with a particular carrier on a given freight order. What we've also done in this particular view is to enable the Explorer view, and as the name indicates, the Explorer view really allows you to drill down from a high amount of information down to really one very small piece of information. It really helps you to drill down to the lowest piece of information. So for example, in the purchasing view, I might say, you know what, I want to drill down by carrier, number 1. So I pick my carrier, which is this one, and then you could further drill down and say, okay, I want to understand what really happened on this particular freight order, which is this one here. And then I want to really understand from a basic rate point of view what happened here. And you can see that from this overwhelming amount of information that was presented, I've been able to really drill down to a very low level, very detailed, very specific piece of information. So once I'm done here from the Explorer view, I can simply flip back to my main story view, and then the last page that we have is the sales view. And again, this is referencing here the data source, which is that custom analytical query that we have been looking at since the beginning, which is exposing sales related information. But again, you can see that we have the information broken down by freight order, by transportation order. And as I did in purchasing, I can also in sales go up the chain and understand, well, which carrier transported what to where, on behalf of what customer. And you can also, with the information that we have exposed here, get a sense of, well, what was my freight portion, what was the freight value, a portion of the total sales item value. So we have the freight value here, we have the item value and the total, which is obviously the item plus the freight. And we also have, if you recall, that calculated measure that we added in the query to determine the percentage freight portion. And it's telling us that for some items, such as this one here, the freight was as much as almost 76% of the total value invoiced to the customer. So again, giving us some really good information in terms of which are the products that are costing me the most to expedite, to transport to my customers. Again, we have done here at the bottom some graphical snippets, KPIs, exposing data by customer. So how much freight is distributed across my customers, which products are costing me the most to expedite them. And then here we have the freight percent by customer. So clearly we have some customers such as this one here that is amounting to on average 50% of the total sales value invoiced. So there you go. That was the SAC story, the SAC dashboard, and also what you could do here, similarly to what we had done with the KPI tile, you could simply add a tile that would make this dashboard directly accessible from the Fiori Launchpad to the users. So there you go. I hope that today's recording has, beyond transportation management, been insightful. It has been informative. It has shown you how to go about creating your custom CDSs. Make sure that you do read those information sources, those blogs that I pointed out, to make sure that you do not fall into pitfalls that are going to at some point plague your reporting journey. As usual, we thank you for your patronage. We thank you for your likes, your subscription to the channel. They really help us to create more content for you in the future. Until next time, stay safe.